strolling in from their breaks. Thank you two so much for being here. This rich conversation with the two of you. The symposium cannot be inclusive and diverse and equal without the two of you, and we missed you last year, Tom. I'm you're one of my favorite people. So thanks to both of you. And Tom, if you cursor down to the bottom, can you see the Q&A?
Yeah, I can see
Hi
it.
to all the attendees who are like, what are you doing? We're just doing some stuff. Okay, if you're comfortable, when you guys are ready after 35 minutes, if you want to just click on that and go from there, because everybody's tired of me. So I would much rather you talk. They've been seeing me for a day and a half. They don't need more of me, and we need more of Minnie. So thanks so much. Yeah, just get this. There's people are strolling in, and I'll just let you take over. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. I'll come on at the end just to say goodbye, but thanks so much. Have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us as well. And let me just apologize firstly. We were due to have the fantastic Sneh Makubu as our third panelist, but she's so knees deep in exams at the moment that she had to pull out, and she was so sorry to do that, but it's such an important year for her. So we're sorry that she's not here to share her stories. And also I apologize now that leaves us gender diversity a slight problem, so apologies for that as well. But do follow Sneh on Insta, because she's got an amazing year of surfing. First Black female QS surfer from South Africa. So really exciting. So my name's Tom Hewitt. I'm the founder of Surfers Not Street Children. And with me is Minnie Cho. Minnie is the Mozambican director of Surfers Not Street Children. He's also a fantastic surfer, and he himself will compete this year on the QS as well. So super excited to have Minnie here with me. Thanks, man.
Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for having me.
Minnie, sorry, I'm just going to set the scene a little bit, and then I'm going to pull you in on questions. And I just want to set a bit of scene as to the history of Surfers Not Street Children. So sorry for having to sit tight for a little bit at the beginning, but we'll get to you soon. You're way more interesting than me, so we'll look forward to that. My background is social justice and the freedom movement in South Africa. I'm actually British. I came to South Africa at the age of 18 as an idealistic young 18-year-old looking for a way to serve local human rights activists in the struggle against apartheid. So I was a very, very small fish, just looking to get involved in some way. I got involved with Nelson Mandela's ANC in the Eastern Cape during the struggle, and was a peace monitor at the first free and fair elections in 1994. And I also went up to Mozambique during that time to meet and help out with peace activists during the Civil War. And it was there that I first met street children. And little did I know at that moment that that meeting with street kids on the streets of Maputo in Mozambique would change the course of my life. I was really shocked to find that kids actually lived on the streets. I'm ashamed to say I didn't even realize that there was such a thing as kids having to live on the streets. And it kind of blew my mind, and that stayed with me. And when I went back to South Africa after that, I started asking questions in the ANC and with other activists. Hey, what's happening with the street children in Durban and in South Africa? Because I started noticing them all over the country. And of course, like, big wheels were turning then. This is 91, 92, and the South Africa was transforming into the new South Africa. Apartheid was ending, so the picture was much bigger. So everyone was, I don't know what's happening with the street kids, but it wasn't that people didn't care. It's just that there was a lot going on. So let me just set the scene a little bit, going back to 1998 when we started Surfers Not Street Children. It's post-apartheid South Africa. Only 4 years since the end of apartheid. That's incredible to think. And I was a surfer at the time, but I was also working with street children. So in my spare time, I surfed, and I was passionate about serving street children. I was involved with a project there. And two narratives that were going on at the same time were there was the first crew of black surfers in Durban. And I was really interested in that because, of course, Durban, as the rest of South Africa, the beaches or the decent beaches had been whites only. And so it was really tough for young black surfers trying to be surfers because there was a power imbalance and there was a culture in place in surfing, and it was really tricky. And these young black surfers, there was only a handful of them, really had to try and be like and emulate the white surfers in order to fit in. It was really difficult, and I could see it so clearly when I moved from the Eastern Cape in South Africa to Durban in 1998. Then at the same time, the other narrative is that of the street children. There were kids living on the streets in Durban. It was one of the most affected areas for street children. Hundreds of kids would live on the streets, and they were an oppressed group, particularly girls. And I struggled with the fact that the most excluded group was still excluded in the new South Africa. And I really started to grapple with the idea of what was their route to freedom. And street life was really tough. I mean, all of the things that you can imagine would happen on the streets for a child living on the streets were happening. And the abuses were rife. Most kids had a background of poverty, but most poor children stay at home. So something had happened in the lives of street children to force them to the streets. And often the abuse would continue in the streets and get worse. It was like going from the frying pan into the fire. And street children tended to internalize what society was telling them. And society was saying that you're second-class citizens, basically, by the way society treated street children, using them in prostitution sometimes, the way they would treat them when kids were begging at the traffic lights, the abuse that they would suffer in many different ways would tell them day in, day out that you're second-class citizens, you're the rubbish of society. And they began to internalize, or they did internalize, their own misery. So they felt that they were the architects of their own misery, which was, or they would internalize their scenario. So they would feel that they were the architects of their misery. In other words, that they were there because that was their lot in life. And I realized that perhaps we could use some of the tools from the struggle against apartheid in developing programs for the street children in Durban. Now, South Africa has an incredible history in its struggle against apartheid. And my colleagues and I drew on the idea of Steve Biko's Black consciousness teachings. And essentially what Biko was saying, and similarly to Paulo Freire, who was in Brazil at the time, was that when oppressed peoples internalize their reality, it becomes very difficult for them to overthrow them. And they need to be able to go through a process of re-envisioning themselves as full human beings. So not seeing themselves as second-class citizens. In South Africa, that was called Black consciousness. And we started to look at how potentially the street children of South Africa could go through a process to re-envision themselves, see themselves as full human beings, and be the architects of their own liberation as well. And that was an exciting period in the 90s and into the 2000s. One day I was surfing at the New Pier in Durban, and anyone who's surfed in Durban will know that the New Pier is the premier wave on the beachfront. It's a right-hander. It's like because of the piers, the way the sand works, you get like a point break with like beach break power, which is really awesome. It's great waves. The beachfront's got a lot of great waves actually. And I was surfing with this kid, and it was about like 3 foot, so it wasn't big. And one of the kids who was in our programs came along the pier and said, "Hey Tom, I want to surf." And now I knew that this kid, whose name was Tula, was able to swim. He'd been in our program, so I knew. And at that time, we didn't have any surfing programs. And I said, "Okay, jump off the pier." The piers are pretty low in Durban, so it's not dangerous. And he jumped off the pier. I put the leg rope around him, and I pushed him into the wave. And as I pushed him into the wave, of course, I'm behind the wave, so I can't see him. But all I could hear was him hooting, literally all the way to the beach. And it was a pure moment of stoke. It was also a light bulb moment for me, because I realized at that moment in 1998, wow, surfing's given me so much. I get so stoked off surfing. Why are we not incorporating surfing into the programs and bringing that in as part of the work we do with street children? And around that time, and by the way, he came back up the pier and he wanted to just go wave after wave after wave. He was hooked after that. And it was a powerful moment. And soon after that, a Durban lifeguard called Enoch Mzolo and myself, we started pushing kids into waves as part of the program. But we could still be pushing kids into waves today, and indeed we still do. But that in itself was not really sustainable. The act of surfing was a political act then. A few years after apartheid, we were giving them agency to co-own space. It wasn't easy at all. No one gives up privilege and power. And yet these young street kids had come into the zone, into the new pier, and it was a big issue. And we got a lot of flack at the time. There were also people who really loved having the kids there, but we had some serious issues. One in particular where the kids were even threatened with a gun on the beach by a group who just didn't want them surfing at the new pier. There were articles written in magazines that were, looking at, were saying basically what happens if the street kids take over the new pier and start like stabbing people with bicycle spokes. It was so bizarre and racist and unbelievable actually. And it was a really difficult time, but incredibly, and actually we realized that this was why the young black surfers that were learning to surf that weren't in the program were so careful to try and assimilate, because it was just such a difficult environment for them. But actually what happened with Surfers Not Street Children is that it changed the racial demographics in Durban. And the street kids came in and actually they didn't really listen to all the negativity, they just surfed. And over time, and like I said, there were some people who were really supportive as well. Fortunately, one of the enforcers, Shane Thorne, used to come up to us and say, hey, don't listen to what they're saying. This is awesome, keep going. And it was good to have people like that on board. What we found now is that whole thing of transforming the racial demographics through the program has actually opened up surfing in Durban to people of color. We've had a lot of people come up and say, hey, it was so difficult then, but now because of the street children, so much has changed. And having seen what happened to the local black surfers of the 90s and how difficult it was for them, and in order to enable the street children to embrace surfing as part of their transformation, we realized that we had to focus on a few really key areas. I'm just going to name those areas now. Then I'm going to bring Minnie in again, and we're going to go through those together. But the areas that we really had to focus on was local leadership. It was super important to have local role models, local leaders from their own culture, people like them that the kids could look up to. And we found some incredible local leaders who now run the programs. We needed to focus on Stoke. The UN Convention of the Rights of the Child calls the right to play as an important right. And surfing, of course, has intrinsic therapeutic value. But the question, of course, is, yes, play is fantastic, but for the kids who are living on the streets to transform their lives, was just surfing enough? And the third is identity, which leads to dignity. And one day I was surfing with the kids and it was like 35 degrees Celsius outside, baking, humid Durban summer. And I've got my boardies on. I'm saying, right, let's go surfing. And the kids all came down in their full suits. And I was like, what? They'd just been donated by O'Neill. And I was like, what? You guys are going to fry. You're crazy. Why are you wearing your wetsuits? And the kids said, no, but Tom, you don't understand. When we walk through the streets with our wetsuits on, we're surfers, not street children. And of course, that's where we got our name. But that was them re-envisioning themselves. That was them taking identity and having dignity. And so identity is one of the key questions and subjects that we focused on. And then self-mastery. because essentially surfing is a quest of self-mastery, and that can have so many life lessons. Fifth, inclusion. The street children and girls in particular had been excluded and sought inclusion in other areas such as gangs. And sixth, transformation towards the future. In other words, if they stayed on the streets, violence, sickness, prostitution, jail, and death were realities. And through surfing and the fusion of that with mentorship and care, psychosocial care, we could work towards the transformation with them in their own lives. So at around the time that we were working with kids on the streets, going back 10, 12 years or so ago, there was another family in Mozambique that had just moved to South Africa. A Mozambican woman and her South Korean husband, and their kids. And they had come to South Africa because post-war Mozambique was so difficult to survive in economically that they sought, as many people do, a better life for the family by migrating south into South Africa. One of those kids was Minnie. Along the way, they didn't find it easy. They found a country where it was very difficult to survive, with its own set of problems, with violence, with a post-apartheid narrative, and with an inbuilt culture of xenophobia as well, which has been a problem in South Africa. And that youngster ended up having to flee with the family, flee South Africa, ended up back at Torful Beach, home in Mozambique, and had to etch out a life from there. That youngster is now a senior leader at Surfers Not Street Children. In fact, he's the director of Surfers Not Street Children Mozambique. That's Minnie, who you can all see now. Minnie, tell us a little bit about what that was like for you. I mean, this is before surfing. This was you as a youngster. Tell us a little bit about that.
So my parents moved to South Africa. My mom is Mozambican, my dad is South Korean. We're a family of 5, so I have 2 other brothers. And we moved to South Africa seeking a better life, and we found it very difficult. Financially, there's a lot of struggles. And as you mentioned, there was quite a lot of xenophobia, and it was directed towards Mozambicans. And my mom was very scared, and she was scared for the family. So financially, we couldn't stay there anymore. And also the xenophobia just became very difficult for us. So the choice was we had to move back to where we came from. And my mom grew up here close to the beach. So luckily we moved back here to Mozambique. And I didn't know a thing about surfing at the time. I was very young. I came back here and we had to try and make a life for ourselves. And my father had to move back to South Korea. So I live here with my mom and my brothers. And yeah, at a very young age, we had to start working, balancing studies and work. We had to start working to support the family and put us all through school. So it's quite a difficult upbringing. But then as soon as I picked up surfing and I started surfing, it's opened up so many doors, and it made life a lot easier for me. And it was my escape at the same time. So yeah, surfing has been really, really great for me. It is a big change in my life, and I couldn't imagine life without surfing now.
Well, when we first met you, Minnie, I remember I was bringing some of the young surfers from Surfers Not Street Children, and Tando, Sikle, and the guys who were ripping, and we were bringing them up to try and inspire the local kids in Mozambique, of which you were one of them at the time. Tell us a little bit about that, because I remember you well on those trips, and they were super fun.
Yeah, so that was really early into my surfing. I think that was maybe 2 years in. So within 2 years, a lot of people had said that I progressed really quick, and I didn't notice it. I was just doing what I do best, trying to do sports. And I remember Tom coming up with the guys, and that was the first time living where I live and surfing here. I live in Mozambique and in Southern Africa. I never had seen a black surfer. And at the time I was, I related a lot to the black surfers and to the surfers of race, of color. And I saw those guys and they were ripping. They surfed better than everyone that surfed on the point. And I had met Biggie in Tando, and one of the first things he said to me is he complimented me. He's like, "Wow, man, you surf so good. You surf like Dane Reynolds." And that's not true. It was not true 2 years in, but it was just the fact that he complimented me that I had this bond with him, and that a surf was so good had complimented me. And then I grew a relationship with the guys, and they're really cool. And once I got to know them a bit more, and their stories and their backgrounds and their upbringings, I related a little bit more with them, because I also had my fair share of struggles, and they struggle too, but they've made it out, and they great surfers. So I had hope for myself too, meeting those guys.
And now you're the director of Tofu Surf Club, which is program in Mozambique. Tell us a little bit about what you do and what the program's about, and how long it's been running.
Well, if you had asked me 5 years ago if I would ever be a director of a Mozambican surfing club in Mozambique, I would say you're lying, because I never imagined myself being in this position. But yeah, right now I am the programs director of Tofu Surf Club, and I am the country director for Service and Street Children in Mozambique. And the program here is really cool. It's we do a lot of surfing, and there's a lot of education that's involved in the club. We have a nice club space that's really close to the beach. And in the club, it's a very safe space for the kids, because the market is a very risky, dangerous area, and the kids are always spending time there. So the club is this safe space where the kids can come in, and it's where they feel most comfortable. And that's kind of the home base for everything. And we do a lot of surfing on the beach. But the cool thing is that at the club, everyone gets to the club after school. It's an after school activity. Everyone gets to the club. They all get ready to go surf. And then we do this walk. We walk in this line right through the market. And it's incredible, because the market has never seen Mozambican surfers. So every single day, the market, with all the people there selling all their stuff, are seeing this long line of kids holding their surfboards, wearing their rashies, looking very proud, walking through the market. So it's also just a very symbolic thing that happens here every day. And it's for me, it's been life-changing to see how the Mozambican kids pick up surfing, and how it's changed their life. It's not just a sport, but it's a lifestyle. And yeah, the surf club has been really good.
And we were talking a little bit about these 6 or so key focus points. And you mentioned yourself that the first time you saw black surfers, you were like blown away. And because finally, you know, someone like you was ripping and shredding, and it was so important. We found in Durban that it was absolutely critical for us to have local leaders. And we're really fortunate, because way back in the beginning, there was one of the first competing black surfers in South Africa, a guy called Sandile Mqadi. And Sandile was competing on the south coast of KZN, and then started a surf club in Mzumbe, which is on the south coast as well. And there'd been a film made about him, and I saw that, and it was super rad. And I was like, wow, this guy's epic. But he wasn't working. And so I kind of made a beeline to try and connect with this guy. And man, we just hit it off. And he's so awesome. And he's or has been for a long time, the South Africa director for Surfers Not Street Children. And he is that role model, that Zulu surfer who's been the role model. Honestly, I mean, he's had awards in South Africa for his work. But I think without him, there'd be far fewer young black surfers. But he's obviously been the core to the program with the street children as well. And then secondly, our social worker who came in a little bit later, or our head social worker called Slindile. Slindile, she's an incredible social worker, and developed with us the Girls Surf 2 program, which is so important, because we also realized that although girls have been included in our programs from the beginning, it became very slanted towards boys. And part of that was there were fewer girls on the streets. And we had very urgent responses to getting girls out of the streets that would actually see them put in care very fast. But we realized that also there were so many kids. I mean, we work with street children, but also with children at risk of street connectedness. So kids that may be living in areas where there's a lot of street life, they might not actually be living on the streets. And we realized that there were so many of girls that were falling prey to being involved in prostitution and drugs and all sorts of social problems. And we found that surfing, this methodology that we have, could be great for diversion for these girls too. So Slee, our social worker, came up with Girls Surf Too. And I think that's why the Durban program, with all the challenges that we have, I mean, there are challenges all the time, but that's why the successes have been so awesome, is that both Sandile and Slee are incredible local leadership. They're local role models from the local culture. And Minnie, how do you think it's been, because obviously there's yourself and there's the rest of the team, they're all local Mozambicans. How important has that been, that it's been a local project?
I think it's been very, very important. It's been a great thing. We have a great team here. I will just introduce a little bit of them. We have Castro. Castro is one of our head coaches, and he's a very well respected guy. He's worked very hard here, and all the kids know him. He's always, playing with the kids, so he's well respected in the community. He used to work at a lot of the establishments doing the maintenance work, but he was a lifeguard. He was one of the first lifeguards saving the kids. There was a few incidents of drownings on the beach here before the lifeguards had set up, and he was one of the guys who was sitting there voluntarily, saving anyone that got in danger. So Castro, we have Julia. Julia, I think, is a great example of that, because there's never been a Mozambican female surfer. I don't think it exists in Mozambican culture. And someone like Julia having that local leadership, the kids, the parents really look up to a female, being a surfer. It's something different, but it's something that's changing the Mozambican culture and the movement of surfing. Someone like Julia brought the likes of Stephanie Gilmore to the surf club, and that was huge. I think once the kids figured out that Stephanie Gilmore was a 7-time world champ, it was huge, and someone like Julia brought her over to the club. So Julia, and then myself, I am the first Mozambican professional surfer to ever compete, and it's been good for the local leadership, because we're very well respected by the local community and the expat community here. And it's good to see that the locals here respect the kids, respect the staff that we have and the team. And it's really good that there's local leadership here, because it hasn't been like that for a very long time. It's been very expat driven, very tourist driven, and it's good to see that now the locals are really taking charge and owning this town and the land that they live on.
Brilliant. I'm going to skip over Stoke, because I think we're most of us as surfers, and we kind of know why Stoke is awesome. So we're running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to skip over that. But that obviously is one of the core facets of what we do. But going back to this idea of identity and the story of the kids saying, hey, we're surfers. When we wear these wetsuits, we're surfers, not street children. This re-envisioning of themselves kind of comes out of that Steve Biko thinking of this process of conscientization, of seeing yourself as a full human, as someone with agency. And this is super important question in today's surfing community, I think it's really important that we learn to broaden the identity. Culture and identity are not the same thing. Culture, you can have identity, a surfing identity within your local culture. I mean, the kids in Durban are Zulu, and they're Zulu surfers. The kids in Mozambique are local Mozambicans, and they're Mozambican surfers. So it doesn't mean changing your culture, it's just having a sense of identity. I remember the kids in Durban, I actually was laughing the one time because the kids were walking down the pier, the surf was pumping, it was like 6 foot plus, and they were walking. In Durban, you can jump off the pier to get to the back line. It's kind of cheating, but once it's over like 4 or 5 foot, it's that you've still got to go through the impact zone. So anyway, they were sort of on the end, about to jump off the pier, and there was hordes of South Africans who'd come down for the Christmas season, and black South Africans on the pier. And these kids that had been street kids and had been kind of stepped over and looked at as dirt before were suddenly like these gladiators on the end of the pier. And everyone was like, wow. And, you know, the visitors to Durban who were on the pier as tourists then had never seen anything like this, and never seen, and certainly didn't imagine that black people did this in South Africa. And that was reminded me that actually that was a kind of extreme version of it, but this kind of re-envisioning of themselves and this identity had just so much dignity with it. But have you seen that with the kids in Mozambique as well?
Yeah. So a similar story here in Mozambique. So it's a bit of a bad thing, but the parents here in Mozambique are not as supportive of kids doing sports. You know, they want their kids to do school and maybe sell some stuff to make some money to help the family. So, you know, recently the parents did also the same thing as the in South Africa, the Mozambicans. There was a rush of local Mozambicans coming from Maputo, so that's the capital. That's like 9 hours down from us, and other places inland had come to the beach, and they cannot believe seeing Black Mozambican kids surfing in the water. And sometimes I'm there on the beach, I'm coaching them and stuff like that, and they're very, very impressed. And they come up to me and they cannot believe it. They're just like, wow, we cannot believe that these kids are surfing. Because in their generation that they grew up, these older people, you know, they didn't learn how to swim, and they didn't have the access to learn how to swim. So it's the same. And the parents of the kids that come to the club, they're very supportive, and it's a new thing for me. If I get a compliment from the parents, it's huge, because I know in the Mozambican culture, the parents are always at home taking care of the family, so they don't really go out the way to support their children if they have to go somewhere. And you know, when we held an event, there was some Mozambican parents that came by to watch, and it was huge, because in the culture it's not normal, and I know that for myself. And yeah, the local Mozambicans from elsewhere, from the inland places, from the capital, cannot believe, and they don't, it's like they're dreaming, seeing Mozambican surfers surfing, and surfing well, not just surfing, standing up on a wave and going straight. These kids are surfing down the line, doing turns. These kids are really, really good and improving really quick. So yeah, that's just, for me, that's the identity. You know, it's like a new identity for the kids, you know, that the Mozambicans are not used to, seeing these kids surfing and being kind of watermen. You know, I think surfers are seen as like these watermen, you know, carrying their boards. You know, a lot of the surfers are looking very toned and chiseled, so they look like watermen, you know, like water warriors. So I think that's also, for me, I've seen that here in Mozambique, and it's pretty cool.
And we're running out of time before we go into questions. We were going to talk about 3 other areas: self-mastery, inclusion, and transformation. I think the self-mastery simply is, we won't dwell on it, but there are so many life lessons in surfing, obviously, and looking at and self-mastery is just one of them. If you can learn to surf, it takes a long time, and you have to work at it and work at it. And that's can be a metaphor for life. So obviously we dwell on that. And then the idea of inclusion, obviously the kids that we're working with, the temptation is to get into gangs and drugs, and to seek inclusion elsewhere. And what this acts as is a diversion. And particularly, you've mentioned this already with girls. I'm not going to dwell more on this, because I'd like to just go on to the idea of transformation. Surfing, with surfers, not street children, surfing isn't the model. Yes, it is therapeutic in and of itself, but it's not the model on its own. We've had kids come through the program who haven't got off the streets, and they still surf, and it hasn't changed their life just surfing. It does give them pleasure, but surfing alone isn't the answer. But if you fuse surfing with mentorship and care, it's a really incredible fit to the model. And I think it's incredible because of that therapeutic element to it. The reality is, for street children, is that if we don't get them off the streets, all those things I mentioned are the inevitable future. Dying of violence, dying of sickness, being in jail, potentially dying in jail. No child should have to live in the streets. And what we're trying to do as an organization, through our team of social workers, carers, alongside the water safety team and the surf coaches, is to empower the kids to be able to transform their lives, and for them to have hope in the future. And very quickly, Minnie, because we're into the Q&A time, on that idea of transformation, what's possible in Mozambique? Because it's a slightly different scenario to South Africa.
Yeah, well, so one of the biggest things alongside surfing is education, and with the surf club, the kids get to surf, but one of the things that we encourage, and one of the requirements, is that the kids go to school. So the kids are so motivated to go to school because they want to finish school, or not finish, but finish the day of school and come surf. So you know, keeping them in school, education, getting them, you know, dignified jobs, good jobs when they're older, and for them to realize their self-worth, their potential in this town, because they always get into the jobs and they don't get paid what they deserve. So in terms of transformation, I see the kids, you know, becoming dive instructors, managers of businesses, restaurants, and they could even be surf instructors, and they could be, you know, one day the director of the club, just like me. So I see a lot of potential for transformation with the Mozambican kids, and surfing has just opened that up for them a lot.
That's awesome. And we're just going on to the questions now. Forgive me, I haven't used this questions section before on Zoom. Can you see it as well, Minnie, or is it?
I'm going to have
the first
a look
one
now.
Okay, this one's for Minnie. If you had to boil down what surfing means to you in a few words or a sentence, what would you say?
Oh, hold on. I just closed my app. I'm sorry.
No worries, we can still hear you.
Okay. Do I press answer live? I'm sorry, I haven't done this before.
You can. I'll tell you. I'll just read them out to you, and you can just answer.
Okay.
So, if you had to boil down what surfing means to you in a few words or a sentence, what would you say?
Yeah, for me, surfing. If you have to boil it down to a few words or a sentence, what would you say? Well, in the beginning, surfing was an escape. So that's one of the words, an escape. But now it's, for me, it's just, what would you say? It's a tough one, but yeah, for me, it's always been my escape. It's where I am myself, where I can be myself. I have no problems out there. And yeah, it's a hard one to answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And here's another question from Matthew Matilla. What do the Pope and Royals have to do with your story? What does that mean for the soul of surfing, Catholic or Anglican? That's funny, man. We're not a religious organization at all, actually, but we have got a partnership with, in our Mozambique program, actually, with an organization called Scholas Ocorrentes, which was the organization that the Pope started before he was Pope. What everyone knows is that the Pope's interested in social justice. What perhaps they didn't know is that he's pretty stoked on surfing. And yeah, a couple of years ago, he saw an edit that we did with Kelly. No, he didn't see. One of his staff saw an edit that we did with Kelly Slater. And we got a call about partnering with the program on, you know, if we were doing a new program. To cut a long story short, they fund 50% of our program in Mozambique. So he's been super supportive. And actually, we took kids to meet him on his trip to Mozambique. So he's really awesome, actually. And the Royals thing, yeah, that's funny as well. But Prince Harry's been supportive. He came to the program in Durban as well. But those are just kind of super funny, fun moments. You know, to be honest, the real unsung heroes are, you know, the people like Minnie, the people like Slindile and Sandile, who are on the ground doing the work every single day. This one, do you see opportunity for the kids in your community to eventually find work in the surfing industry, or maybe more general, the tourism industry, and how? At this moment, I experienced that a lot of surf schools, dive schools are owned by foreigners and rarely have locals working for them in higher end jobs as instructors, from Marika von Bracht. Minnie, that's a good one for you, man.
All right. So I have the question open. Do you see an opportunity for the kids in your community to eventually find work in the surfing industry? Here in Mozambique, yes, it's changing. Why? Because of the surf club. The surf club is really open the doors for change of the kids becoming, you know, qualified surf instructors, and for them to be very comfortable in the water. And it's something that I've been fighting for since I started surfing. You know, I never really saw locals. I was the only local surf instructor in where I live in Tofu at the time. So yes, I do believe there is change. Let me just pull up the question again. At this moment, I experience there's a lot of surf schools and dive schools owned by foreigners and really have locals. And that is true. But here, if you come to Tofu now, there's a lot more Mozambican instructors, dive masters. There's a lot of Mozambican. The surf shop here is fully run. All the instructors are Mozambican. So yes, there is, and working for them in higher end jobs as instructors. Yes, so we have instructors actually. A few of them are my friends, and they also had similar backgrounds, but now they're instructors. They're actually working abroad. Some are still here. So times are changing. Within the last 5 years, definitely the Mozambicans are becoming more. They're on the rise to getting better jobs, better paying jobs, and realizing this their worth and their potential. So yeah, it's changing here in this town. I know in other places it's not still a bit behind, but here in Tofu it's changing.
Thanks, Minnie. Someone says, you apologize for not representing, and yet your program represents plenty of DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Do you hope to see one of your participants representing DEI take Surfers Not Street Children into the forever future? Well, this is a really interesting question because, well, by the way, we're apologizing because for SNAE not being here and therefore not having the more gender diversity in this meeting, which is, that was what we were referring to earlier. But this is a good point. And this is something we've worked really hard on. In fact, way back like 15 years ago, even longer actually, we made a really conscious decision to have former street children included in all levels of decision making in the organization. So that includes being on the board of directors, being in senior management, in management throughout the organization, and our entire water safety team, or all qualified lifeguards, are all former street children. So actually, it's been a project over the years. We've at first we really felt that perhaps former street children could lead everything forward, but then we realized that actually it was the fusion, the meaningful fusion of former street children trained and developed alongside social workers and carers that hadn't lived on the streets, because we needed the balance. Obviously, people who've had the experience have a huge amount that they can give in terms of their experiences. But sometimes it was important to have professionals who could step back and for whom those situations weren't sort of sadly normal. And so we found that the fusion of former street children in the programs has really been critical. But I mean, the beauty of it is someone like Minnie, who was one of the kids that we would take the kids in the program up to try and inspire, who's now a leader in South Africa, and frankly, could go on, in Mozambique, and frankly, could go on to lead the entire organization in time, is something that really excites us when we scheme and plan together. I appreciate your point about needing to find people with the same identity as these children in order for them to feel comfortable in the program. Can you touch a bit more on how you were able to tap into this group and how you found leaders in these groups that now help make this a reality? From Alyssa. Yeah, I mentioned earlier about how we found Sandile. And yeah, I think it was, one of the great things about being around for a long time, we've been running since 1998, was that you have time to really develop your knowledge of who's who and to identify people with potential. And actually, Minnie is the classic example of identifying someone with huge potential and then looking at how to work with them to develop that. But maybe on this one, Minnie, you can talk about how we found some of the Mozambican leaders. You mentioned it a bit earlier, actually.
Yeah, so just to recap, I'll speak mainly about Julia. So a bit of Julia's story. Julia is she's my age too. I'm 21, for anyone that didn't know. Both her parents had passed away, and she really didn't have much going on for her life. So I used to work at a surf shop before I started working for Surfers Not Street Children, and I would always try and get her involved in anything that I could do because I really wanted to help her. And then as soon as the club started, she was one of the first people that I brought into the team. She was the first person I brought into the team. And it's proven to be great because someone like Julia is, paving the way for the first, for the Mozambican female surfers. There's a lot of girls now starting to surf. Well, a bit because of the club, but some of them don't only surf because of the club. They surf because they see Julia, they see a female surfing. And so that local leadership outside and in the water is very important. So someone like Julia is a perfect example of that. And she's opened up the door for a lot of the Mozambican female surfers that want to surf. And the group is growing now. So yeah, someone like Julia is a perfect example of that.
We're going to have to call it a day now because we've gone 1 minute over. Apologies for that. There was one more question from Bob about how does Stoke relate to this audience versus my USA perspective. Stoke has always been the key ingredient, because if you're going to try and get the kids out of street life, out of drugs, Stoke isn't the only ingredient to that, but it's a really important ingredient because it gives them something to focus on. Everyone wants to be a better surfer, and they're frothing so hard over it that we found that it's one of the most important ingredients for kids leaving drugs and leaving other problems within the street life scenario. Sorry, I can't go into that further. Minnie, thanks, man. Really appreciate having you on this. Love working with you, man. So yeah, thank you. And thanks to everyone for listening. Sorry we haven't had a bit longer. Chris, sorry to run over a little bit.
No. Are you kidding? I think we'd like a day with you both, if that's possible. Minnie, can we please bring you to next year's symposium, which we all hope it will be in person. And Tom and I have been discussing this for a year and a half, if not further, about how, Tom, you need to be on all the panels because it was so moving and it's so impactful. And it's fun to, as the International Surf Therapy Organization is about sharing, and it's about advancing and promoting surf therapy, and the work you're doing is changing the world. So I just, on behalf of everybody here, all the attendees and the ISTO board, gosh, thank you so much, Tom, for putting this together. And Minnie, it was lovely to meet you. Good luck in your endeavor. Well, yeah, good luck in your endeavor. We're all going to be fans now. We'll all be stalking you on social media. I hope that's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart. This was incredible and rich conversations, and we wish we had more time. Tom, I'm going to, for the attendees' sake, I'm actually going to copy paste these questions. And if you don't mind, can I email them to you and get you to write up the answers so that I can share with the sector? Awesome. Thanks again, gentlemen. And to the attendees, we have our all Spanish speaking panel up next. It is going to be transcribed in English, so please jump on and join. Thanks again, Tom and Minnie. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Bye.